Class is in session. Hey everybody, welcome to Unlearn 16. Class is in session. You just get me today, guys. Just me. Just me all by myself. Well, you get me and you'll get Ripley, who will lie on the very large light and then try to push other lights over as I do this podcast. But just me, and I have to address something that's a bit controversial. Only because it's sort of inundated every single place I go. I've tried to avoid it. I've tried to ignore it. I've tried to just put it where it belongs, which is maybe in sort of the naive place of a kid writing a couple song lyrics, but I can't anymore. And I've had a few people who are much less controversial than I read over this song and go, okay, should it be controversial? Shouldn't it be? And the song that we're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about today, is Try That in a Small Town by what's his face? Jason Aldean. Now, the idea, try that in a small town, the idea doesn't seem so horrific, right? The main premise, originally when I started hearing all of this controversy, I'm like, oh, listen, can we just, like, this country, can we just leave it alone? Like, is it really that bad? Is it really that ill-intended? I mean, that's what my goal is, right? My goal has always been, is there hate behind it? Or is there ignorance behind it? And I don't mean that in a rude way. I mean that in a certain people come from certain places in certain environments, and the idea of these externalities doesn't really resonate with them. And it's not because they're bad people. It's because they haven't had the experience, right? And so I read this, as I'm listening to it, every place it is, and I'm seeing TikToks about it and videos about it and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, I'm just going to go read the lyrics. And I'm going to talk about the lyrics with you guys. And please feel free to put whatever, respectfully, be nice, respectfully in my comments, because I think it's an interesting discussion. Now, am I pro tear the song down? Of course not. Of course not. Go sing whatever you're going to sing. There's a lot of songs out here that I'm not necessarily a big fan of. Here's the problem for me for this song, because there's a lot of bigotry, there's a lot of hate, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of anger in many different forms of music. And you constantly know where they're coming from for the most part, right? A lot of the time, you know exactly where those musicians are coming from, usually from very specific lived experience and sort of a political belief system that they are firmly embedded in. Look, just because I disagree doesn't mean I don't get why they're coming from where they're coming from. Now, when I looked at this, here's the problem I have with this song. And I'm going to talk about a few of the lyrics. Actually, I'm going to talk about all the lyrics. I'm going to put all the lyrics on the table and try to have, even if there's no such thing, the most objective. Like, can I look at these lyrics and kind of take it from both sides? Because I think I can. Try to find out where this is coming from. And I think the primary place this is coming from is this idea, the notion. And I think it's a fictional one. It's a stereotypical one. This stereotypical notion that a small town is filled with good people who want to take care of each other. And the more that you know your neighbor, the more likely you are to take care of them. And in a small town, you're more likely to know your neighbor. I don't see the in that idea. I'm of the belief, by the way, that it's not about a small town. It's about the underlying principle, and I believe this to be true, that good people are good people. And the majority of us, the vast majority of us, don't want to see harm come to our neighbor, don't want to see harm come to other people, want to stand up against injustice, want to stand up against violence, want to make sure that everybody is okay. And in a bigger city, it is much more likely you're much more capable of not belonging to to said any community. Now, was that true back in the day, and was that true today? Okay, well, let's look at it. Back in the day, and I mean, let's say all those people that like to say, let's make America like it was again. What day are we talking about here, folks? The 50s? The 60s? The 70s? When do we want to go back to? When was that good old small town mentality healthy, vibrant? And I know I'm going to be deep in stereotype here, but was everybody safer in that environment? Or perhaps, was everybody safer in that environment that fit that stereotypical, traditional expectation? That's what I want to know. Because are we just talking about, well, that good old small town was always good before significant immigration into the region, before the LGBTQ community was able to sort of hold their head up a little bit higher? African American communities were able to feel safe within those communities because back in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, guys, for those people, was a small town safe? Now, I'm not going to argue that a big city was safe. What I am saying to you is this individual, this country singer, Jason, is relying on this pretense of safety within small towns that maybe possibly existed for certain kinds of people in certain time periods. And maybe today it exists a little bit more. I don't know. Guys. Is a small town less likely to have hate crime? Well, one of the first plays I ever watched was the Laramie Project. Right? Laramie, Wyoming. What did that small town do? Well, in Laramie, Wyoming, they tied a gay kid to the back of their truck and drove him out to the middle of a field, tied him like a scarecrow up to a fence post, and left him there. Is that the small town mentality he's talking about? And again, I'm going to say, I don't think big cities, and we're free of this as well. I think, though, having this illusion of safety, this pretense of safety and a better moral code in a smaller town is just that. It's a pretense. And I think I would argue that in light of the onslaught of vitriol towards the trans community and Dylan Mulvaney specifically, who had the audacity to drink a Bud Light, would she be safe in any of these small towns? Are these small towns standing up saying, not on my watch? Because then I really start thinking about protecting people in a small town. Are you just protecting them? Are you just standing up for them because they're next to you? Or is there an underpinning, a moral code, a moral compass that you are supposed to adhere to make sure people do not face violence, discrimination, hatred, harassment? Aren't we all? And if we're all a part of that, I'd just like to know where Jason's song is to talk about how half of small towns bought a bunch of Bud Light, got out their very powerful semi-automatic weapons, machine gunned it down. Where was the take care of your neighbor then? Or are we just saying you should take care of certain neighbors, certain kinds of people? Because I don't love it. I don't love what I feel as though it's trying to reflect. So we're going to go stanza by stanza. Guys, this is like grade 10 poetry. Please have a seat, Maybe write down some jot notes, come up with your own ideas. Here's the first stanza. Sucker punch somebody on a sidewalk, carjack an old lady at a red light, pull a gun on the owner of a liquor store. You think it's cool? Well, act a fool if you like. First stanza. Now, are we saying there's no violence in small towns? Nobody's got sucker punched? Or are we saying that the idea of somebody getting sucker punched, we get to judge who gets hit, how they get hit, why they get hit? Pull a gun on there's been no robberies in small towns? Are we joking? Statistically, we know that happens, right? Carjacking an old lady. Listen, violence and having this notion that carjacking a particular group is somehow more damaging than carjacking another group is absolutely ridiculous. I think statistically, and I'm not even going to play statistics here, guys, because I know you can say these statistics are wrong, these statistics are right. Statistically, fewer people in a small town, fewer acts of violence. It doesn't make them better people. It doesn't make them worse people. The notion that they might be more accountable because their neighbor knows them is an interesting one. That's interesting. But let me be clear. That doesn't make them necessarily better people. That just holds them at a higher level of accountability because it's hard to be anonymous in a small town. Possibly. Next one. Cuss out a cop, spit in his face. Stomp on the flag and light it up. Yeah, you think you're tough. Number one, cuss at a cop and spit in his face. Unprovoked. It's just, of course. Don't cuss or spit on anybody. Don't. But what he's going to negate there very, very quickly are the very real, very harmful, very consistently provable instances of police brutality and police aggression in some areas towards very particular people within the community. And those particular people tend to be visible minorities. How long do you get beat? How long do you get arrested? How long do you get treated like a second-class citizen before you're ready to fight? How long? How long before? No, that's enough. No, thank you. Like, I don't feel afraid when I get pulled over. Well, I do, only because I think that I've done 17 things wrong. But I'm not afraid because I feel as though I'm at a higher risk. I don't know what that's like. But to deny it, to deny its existence, deny the truth about driving a car while black is ridiculous and offensive and incredibly damaging to everybody's sense of reality and how to fix these problems. And then just to minimize it like this, I feel as though, this kid hasn't had that kind of run-in. And I'm happy for him. Listen, I don't want anyone to have that kind of run-in, but don't degrade it. Don't pretend as though it doesn't exist. Don't sort of push it to the fringes without context and without, the realities of those situations. Stomp on the flag and light it up. Guess what? That's your constitutional right. I thought small town kids purporting traditional values agree with the Constitution. And constitutionally, the flag as your idea to protest or as your idea to sort of talk about the infrastructure and the government that you have and the decisions you make, that is the least violent or hateful thing you could possibly do. That is purely symbolic. Purely symbolic. It's like taking a knee during the national anthem. Could you think of anything more peaceful as a form of protest than taking a knee? Or burning an inanimate object that you own? Can you think of anything more peaceful? Of course you can. But somehow these peaceful forms of protest coming from communities that have been historically discriminated against, harassed, violence has been perpetrated upon them. And I'm not, I don't need to go through example after example. And their retort, is taking a knee. Taking a knee during the national anthem? I don't get it. Yeah, you think you're tough. All right, here we go. Next line. Well, try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road. Around here, we take care of our own. I don't love that either. Because when you say take care of your own, is that just because you live next to them? When you're standing up for your fellow, and this kid's American, your fellow Americans, aren't they all deserved the same right? Aren't they all deserve the same protection? Shouldn't you be making songs in protection of, in support of everybody's democratic right? Just curious. Or is it just the dude that happened to live next to you? And since they live next to you and they know what your face is like, you're supposed to have a higher moral code. And I know some of you are going to be like, listen, Joanne, it's tribal, right? You protect your tribe, you form these communities. It is who you're in the space with. Part of me understands that. But let's not pretend as though in small towns, just as in big cities, there can be a little bit more anonymity. In small towns, there can be very, very sort of cliched groups, secrets kept, damage that's been done in the house down the street that you never talk about it. Why? Well, you like that family. Or you gossip about that family. I used to live in a small town, guys. Come on now. That kind of vitriol was consistent. And the biggest problem, I'm against crime of all shapes and sizes. You want to address crime, there's bigger issues to address. But if you want to address crime at the root, the number one thing you need to stop doing is being quiet about the crimes you know who have been committed. I lived in a small town. Do you know how many people drove drunk every weekend? Guys, the whole freaking town. It was a sport. Is that how you took care of your neighbor? Is that what you did? Do you know the different levels of domestic violence that go on, that people know about? Oh, well, that's not my business. That's their family. No. That's violence. Is that going on in the house? Are you keeping out of things because that's what goes on in their house? Is it just the violence perpetrated by external forces of people that came to your small community? Is that the only violence you don't like? Because I lived in a small town. There was a lot of secrets kept and a lot of shame and a lot of protection depending on who you were. And to be honest, for the most part, goes on in your own house, we don't talk about it. Where do you think that violence stems? You cross the line, it won't take long. For you to find out, I recommend you don't. So, there's a nice little violence coming back. Now, it's very Batman of him. Very vigilante. Listen, I all like a Batman. And we all like that scene in the movie in which the guy knows something's going, I say the guy knows something's going on bad in a house or something's going on down here and he takes it upon himself and he's going to go straighten out the room, right? We like that. We like that idea. We like that idea because it makes us feel that people are just going to stand up for, what's right. But again, I go back to how many doors get knocked at? How many? How many kids are allowed to face a certain level of assault? How many times do you knock at that door? I don't know. I really don't know. What I do know is that that's all going on in a small town. The number one problem in this song, in my opinion, is it's giving the illusion that it's all externality. It's very xenophobic, right? That's the basis of this. You were born here, you grew up here, you're going to die here, we're going to protect you. But anybody else coming into that circle, anybody else breaching that bubble, they are the problem. We will take care of it. Because the only violence that's ever going to happen is from somebody external. is from somebody that doesn't belong here, is somebody who didn't get their gun from their granddad. Right? And then they're just upping it. Got a gun from my granddad. They say one day they're going to round them up. Well, that might fly in the city. Good luck. No, Second Amendment. Yay. How dare you try to round them up? Horrible. Disgusting. We're the ones like protecting our land from all those externalities. And again, it just heightens levels of violence, right? These guys aren't Batman. I haven't seen them have cool gadgets one time. And we go back to the chorus. Try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road. Again, this is just straight up threats of retaliatory violence. Around here, we take care of our own. Again, I question, do you? You cross that line? What line? What's the line? For you to find out, I recommend you don't try that in a small. Full of good old boys raised upright. Oh. All right, Jason. This is where you might have stepped on it. I don't know if you stepped on it. I don't know if you heard the click of the mine, but you stepped on it here. Because when you say the good old boys nowadays, it doesn't inspire ideas of individuals who were raised right. It inspires ideas of the Proud Boys. It inspires ideas of a group of men who have taken it on themselves to decide what is okay and acceptable moral behavior and ethical behavior in their town and to use violence in order to ensure it. And that has ended horrifically in a lot of southern states. Horrifically. And a lot of northern states for that matter. Good old boys raised upright. What does raised upright mean to you? Because I know eventually we're going to talk about God at some point. I know you have in other songs, but maybe you don't necessarily in this song. What does that mean? What does raised upright mean? Because what it should mean is a level of standing up for people, period. Period. Where's the country song supporting the abuse and the battery and the violence perpetrated against minority groups? Where's that? Is it just your town you want to protect? Try that in a small town. It won't take long. And we just, we repeat it. Now, CMT pulled the video. Country music television. Does somebody watch television music anymore? Anyway, he pulled the video. I didn't watch the video. I guess I could have watched the video. I don't know. There's only so much that I wanted to do. Now, he tried to explain it and why it became such a huge controversy. Well, I'll tell you why. Because everybody is on edge, right? There's no way around it. Everybody's on edge about the lyrics you use, the stance you take, what you say is okay, what you say it isn't. And this notion, because I don't think people from small towns like to be stereotyped as being, less people either. Meaning sometimes there's stereotypes of people in small towns not being educated enough, or not being worldly enough, or not being accepting enough, and all of those things. But when you flip it, I don't abide that, by the way. I think people are inherently, let me say this, people, no matter where you live, are inherently good. And I think the environment in which you live and the place in which you live and your experiences can possibly push us to places we don't naturally want to go. But I don't think that's happening in a small or a big town anymore or any less. I think the numbers are the difference, right? And I do think the level of anonymity is interesting. It's kind of the reason sometimes, if you have videotape footage of people, there's a theory, panopticon, I might be saying that wrong. There's this theory that if we are on visual display at all times, meaning you are constantly surveilled, and in a small town you kind of are, right? Because everybody knows who you are, everybody sees coming and going, Bobby was out till 2 a.m. Oh, I saw his daughter. She was out till 3. I was on my porch. Look, there's that kind of vibe sometimes in a small town. But it's the same kind of idea. It's this idea that we are being surveilled. And in a surveilled state, two things tend to happen. We commit less crime, or we figure out new ways to get around it. Right? And if you're constantly surveilled, it might help. It might help. But if you're constantly surveilled, you're constantly looking about how not to be. So I think we're starting to see this divide. And what I don't like about this song a lot is that it's really, really driving yet another wedge. Driving another wedge between the them and us. Between their problem and our moral high ground. And I get it. Again, I'm not a big fan of censorship. I'm not pulling anything. And I know a lot of people are like, well, did you hear what Nicki Minaj sang about? Listen, Linda. There's also a big difference. It's not a swear word that's the problem. It's not it's not a harshness with what you say. It's what is your intent to say it? What is your goal? And when I get through this whole song, and when I try to feel what his goal is, I don't like it. I don't like it. And at the bottom line of everything, in my opinion, it is the xenophobia. It is the fear of foreigners, the fear of outsiders. It's always them. It's them. They did it. We were great until they stepped into our community. And then they brought with it violence and this and that and whatever. And that kind of mentality, and I don't know to go too deep in history, but it's that kind of mentality that is setting us up for, rather than understanding each other, for separating ourselves from each other, for seeing the evil in each other before we ever take to understanding, for living with the stereotype of one another. And as soon as you have a vigilante kind of justice, there's a reason why vigilante justice doesn't, first of all, it's illegal. It's because it's all emotion. It's all emotion. And if you were to ask any individual person, what would you do? And this is always the big question. What would you do if it was your son or your daughter, your mom or well, we get crazy and we get violent. But if we're thinking what is best for the community, because you can't, I couldn't. And that's why I, as a victim of that, don't get to perpetrate the punishment. Because the punishment would probably be excessive. And the division that this is preying upon is clear. Who's they? That's my question. I'd sit him down and I'd say, it's you, and this is what I would love to ask him. It's you in your small town. I love the notion of everybody knowing each other and taking care of each other and caring what goes on in their house and making sure that everybody's protected, even from within the walls of their own house. Is that what's going on? Because I don't think it is. But I would ask, who are they? That's the only question I would sit down and ask Jason. When you start talking about they, when you start talking about your good old town, when you start talking about, you protect your own, when you say things like that, what you're inferring is that there is a they external to that, and it's the they who is external who causes all the problems, who brings in the violence, who brings in the hate, who brings in the destruction. And it's not the case. It's not the case. And I'm going to say one more thing. It actually creates the circumstance for which that to become true. Because if you already see them as a threat and you treat them, and I use air quotes, heaven help me, you treat them as a threat, eventually violence will fall. And I'm not sure by who first. But I go back to Laramie, Wyoming, and I think about the violence that came from within that community. And I think about Matthew Shepard being tied to that pole. And I think, well, that small town sure didn't protect him, did it? Thanks for hanging out with me, guys. Please leave all your comments below. I'd really love a bigger discussion about this. I think this is incredibly important. And I will see you next Tuesday. Same bat time, same bat station. Dismissed.